Elemental is a 2023 animated fantasy film produced by Pixar Animation Studios and distributed by Walt Disney Pictures. It was directed by Peter Sohn, a filmmaker and animator who has spent the majority of his professional career at Pixar, contributing to some of the studio's most beloved projects before stepping into the director's chair for The Good Dinosaur in 2015, and then returning to direct Elemental nearly a decade later. The film was released theatrically on June 16, 2023, and its arrival in cinemas was itself a statement of intent. In the years leading up to Elemental's release, Pixar had sent several of its films directly to the Disney Plus streaming platform, bypassing theaters entirely. The decision to give Elemental a full theatrical release signaled that the studio believed the story deserved the largest possible canvas, the biggest screen, the most immersive environment. And once you experience the visual world that the filmmakers created, that decision makes complete sense. This is a film designed to overwhelm the senses in the most beautiful way possible. The film belongs to the animated fantasy romance genre, though that description barely scratches the surface of what it actually is. It is also a coming-of-age story, a family drama, a meditation on immigration and belonging, a love letter to first-generation children who have grown up between two worlds, and a deeply personal statement from a director who drew from the most intimate corners of his own life to make it. The premise is built around an original world called Element City, a vast, teeming, impossibly colorful urban environment where beings made of fire, water, earth, and air all live and work and struggle alongside each other. The story centers on a young fire woman named Ember, who works in her family shop in the Fire Elemental neighborhood and is trying to navigate the enormous expectations her immigrant parents have placed on her shoulders while quietly wrestling with the growing sense that her true path might lead somewhere else entirely. Into her carefully controlled life comes Wade Ripple, a water elemental whose entire personality is the opposite of everything Ember has been taught to be, and their connection, which should be physically impossible given that fire and water cancel each other out, becomes a central emotional engine of the film. Peter Sohn has spoken extensively in interviews about the deeply autobiographical nature of this project. He grew up in the Bronx in New York City as the child of Korean immigrants. His parents operated a small grocery store, working extraordinary hours every single day to build a life and a future for their family in a country that was not always welcoming to them. Growing up in that environment, surrounded by his parents' sacrifice and dedication and cultural pride, while also being shaped by the city around him and by American culture and by his own emerging sense of who he was and what he wanted, gave Sohn a rich and complicated emotional landscape to draw from. The Fireplace shop in Elemental is a direct translation of his parents' grocery store. Ember's struggle between duty and self-determination is a direct translation of Sohn's own journey. The flame that Bernie carries in the fire homeland represents the culture and memory that immigrant families carry with them across oceans and decades. All of this specificity, all of this personal truth, is baked into the DNA of the film at every level. And it is precisely because the film is so rooted in genuine personal experience that it resonates so powerfully with audiences well beyond the specific cultural context it draws from. The production was developed over several years at Pixar, going through many iterations and significant story changes before arriving at the version that reached theaters. The technical challenges alone were immense. Creating fire and water characters who could convey the subtle range of human emotional expression, who could make audiences laugh and cry and care about them, required Pixar develop entirely new simulation tools and rendering systems. The result is something that had never been done before in animated film, and the visual achievement of Elemental stands as one of the most remarkable in the studio's history, which is saying something given that Pixar's history includes some of the most technically groundbreaking animation ever created. The plot. The film opens not with Ember but with her parents, and this choice tells you immediately what kind of story this is going to be. By beginning with the immigrant journey, by showing us Bernie and Cinder arriving in Element City before Ember even exists, the film establishes that Ember's story cannot be understood without understanding where she comes from and what was given up and what was built before she arrived in the world. This structural choice is one of the most emotionally intelligent decisions in the film. Bernie and Cinder arrive in Element City by boat, and the sequence of their arrival is rendered with a combination of wonder and anxiety that perfectly captures the immigrant experience. Element City rises before them like a promise, enormous and brilliant and full of possibility. But it is also a place that was not built for them. As they step off the boat and begin to make their way through the city, the environmental details communicate the difficulty of their situation with elegant visual economy. Signs are not in their language. The architecture and the spaces do not accommodate fire elementals well. The other elementals they encounter look at them with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to outright discomfort. Fire elementals are different. Fire elementals are new, and in a city that has developed its own rhythms and conventions and hierarchies over a long time, new is not always welcome. Bernie and Cinder find their way to a part of the city that will become known as Firetown, a neighborhood at the edge of Element City, where fire elementals have begun to settle, because it is the part of the city where they can most comfortably exist. The neighborhood is not much when they arrive. It is rough and underdeveloped, and clearly not a priority for city investment, but it is theirs. And Bernie, with a particular stubborn love that immigrant parents direct toward the futures they are building, sees in this rough space the beginning of something. He sees the shop he is going to open. He sees the life he is going to make, and he sets to work. Bernie opens a Fireplace, a shop that sells goods from the fire elemental homeland. Food, spices, cultural materials, items that carry in their physical substance the memory and the taste and the smell of a place left behind. The shop becomes immediately important to the fire community in Firetown because it provides not just material goods, but connection to home, a reminder of identity in a city that can sometimes make you feel like you do not quite belong anywhere. And Bernie tends his connection with the devotion of someone who understands exactly what it means to the people who walk through his door. In the window of the shop burns a flame. This is not just any flame. Bernie carried it from the fire homeland, and it represents in concentrated form everything that he and Cinder left behind and everything they are working to preserve. It is treated in the film almost like a sacred object, something to be protected and honored, and its presence in the shop window, visible from the street, is Bernie's way of saying to every fire elemental who passes by that this is a place for them, that their culture and their identity are valued here, that they have not been forgotten. Then Ember is born, and the film moves through her childhood in a series of quick, warm, beautifully observed moments that establish the texture of growing up in the Lumen family and in Firetown. Young Ember is passionate and curious and almost explosively energetic. She is fascinated by everything in the shop. She wants to know every product, every procedure, every customer. Bernie delights in teaching her, and there's a real joy in these early scenes, the joy of a parent watching their child engage with the world they have made for them. Ember learns to speak the fire language and the common language of Element City. She learns the rhythms of the shop and the rhythms of the neighborhood. She grows up belonging to all of this completely. But even in these early scenes, the film plants the seeds of the conflict that will drive the rest of the story. Ember has a temper. When things go wrong, when she is frustrated or overwhelmed or pushed past her limit, her fire does not just burn brighter, it explodes. It becomes wild and uncontrolled, and potentially destructive. This is not a character flaw, in the simple sense of something she needs to eliminate. It is connected to her fundamental nature, to the same fire that makes her passionate and creative and alive. The film understands this distinction from the very beginning, even if Ember herself does not fully understand it yet. The prologue ends, and we arrive in the present of the film story, where Ember is now a young adult and the shop is facing a critical transition. Bernie has been running the Fireplace for decades. His body is getting tired. His spirit is as strong as ever, but the long years of labor have taken a physical toll. He is ready to begin handing things over to Ember, and he announces his intention at a community gathering with great pride and ceremony. The fire community celebrates. Bernie celebrates. And Ember smiles and accepts the role, because this is what she was raised for. This is what she's been preparing for. This is her purpose. But watch her face when the celebration happens. There is something in her expression that goes slightly beyond the joy of the moment. There is something that looks like the weight of the thing settling onto her shoulders. Not just pride or excitement, but the specific gravity of a decision that was made for her before she was old enough to make it herself. The first major crisis of the present-day story happens during what should be a routine day at the shop. Ember is handling things increasingly on her own, and the day accumulates its small frustrations in the way that days at a shop dealing with the public always do. Difficult customers, unexpected complications. things not going according to plan. Each small frustration adds heat to the pressure that is building inside Ember, and when the breaking point comes, it comes comprehensively. Ember's fire erupts in the basement of the shop with a force and intensity that breaks through the wall and connects with one of the city's water pipes running below. The pipe bursts, water floods in, and out of the chaos, soaking wet and deeply confused, comes Wade Ripple. The meeting between Ember and Wade is played for both comedy and significance. It is funny because of the sheer improbability and absurdity of the situation. A firewoman stands in the flooded basement of her family shop, staring at a waterman who had been shot through a broken pipe into her life without any warning whatsoever. It is significant because the film has established with visual clarity that fire and water are not supposed to coexist. Their contact is destructive by definition. And yet here they are, coexisting. Wade establishes himself immediately as a character who is almost entirely without pretension or guardedness. He is warm and curious and emotionally open in a way that is somewhat disarming, especially Ember, who has grown up in a family and a community that prizes strength and endurance and keeping things together. Wade feels things immediately and openly. He is moved by things quickly and without embarrassment. He is the kind of person who cries at beautiful sunsets and moving pieces of music in moments of unexpected kindness. And because he is made of water, his crying is a literal physical event. When Wade gets emotional, water comes out of him. The film uses this for both comedy and genuine emotional effect throughout the story. Wade informs Ember that because of the water damage in the basement, he is required as a city inspector to file an official report. This report could trigger a full inspection of the fireplace, and given the age of the building and the various issues that have accumulated over the years, that inspection could potentially mean the shop being cited for violations. In the worst-case scenario, it could mean the shop being required to close temporarily or permanently. For Ember, who has just been publicly announced as the shop's future owner, and who understands exactly what the shop means to her father and her community, this possibility is catastrophic. She argues with Wade. She tries to persuade him to look the other way. And Wade, who is fundamentally a good person but also genuinely curious about this firewoman he has unexpectedly found himself in conversation with, makes a counteroffer. He will help her address the problems that the report would otherwise flag. They will work together to fix what needs fixing. And if they can resolve the issues, he will not need to file the report that would trigger an inspection. It is not exactly a standard procedure for a city inspector, but Wade operates more on the basis of genuine helpfulness than strict bureaucratic protocol. And so the central partnership of the film begins. Ember and Wade agree to work together, which requires them to spend significant time in each other's company, navigating the city together, problem-solving together, learning each other's world. For Ember, who has spent almost her entire life within the relatively tight boundaries of Firetown and the shop, this is an expansion into unfamiliar territory. For Wade, who is accustomed to moving through the city with the ease of water finding its level, having a fire elemental companion means navigating in new ways, being conscious of new constraints, seeing the city through different eyes. What they discover, as they investigate the problems with the water infrastructure beneath Firetown, is significantly more serious than a broken pipe in a shop basement. The water system that runs through the Firetown neighborhood is old and deteriorating. It has been inadequately maintained and never upgraded to modern standards. The reason for this is not technical. It is political and social. Firetown is not a neighborhood that has historically received the same level of city investment and attention as other parts of Element City. The fire community built their neighborhood themselves, with their own resources and their own labor, and the city has largely left them to manage it themselves as well. The infrastructure beneath their streets is decades out of date, and it is failing. This discovery raises the stakes of the story considerably. What began as Ember trying to prevent the fireplace from being inspected has become something much larger. The flooding risk that Wade's investigation reveals is not just a risk to the shop. It is a risk to the entire neighborhood. Homes, businesses, the community spaces that generations of fire elementals have built and cared for, all of it is potentially threatened by the failing water system that runs beneath it. As Ember and Wade work through this investigation together, spending long days in each other's company and navigating both the physical and bureaucratic landscape of Element City, they are also getting to know each other in ways that neither of them expected. The film develops their relationship with patience and care, building it through the accumulation of small moments and shared experiences rather than rushing toward the obvious romantic destination. There is a moment that happens almost accidentally when Wade watches Ember work with glass for the first time, and this moment changes the direction of everything. They are somewhere in the city dealing with one of the various problems their investigation has uncovered, and Ember, out of habit or stress or simple instinct, begins to work with some sand nearby, using her fire to melt it and shape it. Wade watches her hands. He watches the sand transform under her touch. He watches the shapes she creates, elegant and complex and genuinely beautiful, with the natural fluency of someone who's been doing this for a long time. And when she finishes, he is completely still for a moment. Then he looks at her with an expression of pure wonder. He asks her about it. How long has she been doing this? She is dismissive, saying it is nothing. It is just something she does sometimes. He does not accept this. He tells her with complete sincerity that what she just made is extraordinary, that she has a genuine gift, that he has never seen anything like it. Ember is uncomfortable with this attention. She is not used to someone paying this kind of focused, admiring attention to something she does for herself rather than something she does in service of others. And she is particularly not used to someone looking at her creative work and seeing it as something valuable in its own right rather than as a hobby that is secondary to her real responsibilities. But the seed is planted, and Wade, because he is Wade and because he has no capacity for pretending that beautiful things are not beautiful, keeps bringing it back up. He asks more questions. He wants to understand how she does it. He wants to see more. And gradually, over the course of their time together, Ember begins to let him into this part of herself that she has kept very quietly contained. She starts to let herself imagine, just a little, what it might mean to take her glass work seriously, to actually make something of it, to choose it as a path rather than treating it as a secret indulgence. Wade brings Ember to meet his family, and this sequence is one of the most warmly observed in film. The Ripple family home is abundant and overflowing and chaotic in the best possible way. Where the Lumen family is compact and purposeful and deeply organized around their work, the Ripples seem to exist in a state of happy overflowing warmth that fills every available space. Wade's mother, Brooke, is a magnificent figure, large and luminous and immediately welcoming. She pulls Ember into the family with no hesitation, no reservation, no concern about the fact that Ember is a fire elemental and therefore technically incompatible with everyone in the house. Brooke sees a person. She sees a young woman who is important to her son, and she treats that as enough reason to open her home completely. The contrast between how Ember experiences the Ripple family and how she experiences her own family is intentional and significant. This is not to suggest that the Lumen family is cold or unwelcoming. Bernie loves Ember with a depth and ferocity that the film portrays with real tenderness. But the Lumen family's love is expressed through work, through duty, through the building and maintaining of something. The Ripple family's love is expressed through presence, through openness, through an almost reckless willingness to let people in. Seeing this other way of being a family is moving for Ember. It shows her that there are different ways love can look, different ways it can be expressed. Brooke, in a quiet moment with Ember, says something that lands with particular weight. She talked about her own life, about the choices she made, about the things she pursued and the things she did not. And in the spaces between what she says explicitly, she communicates something to Ember about the importance of living your own life rather than someone else's idea of what your life should be. Brooke is not telling Ember to leave her family or abandon her responsibilities. She is simply gently suggesting that there is more possible for Ember than what Ember currently allows herself to imagine. And Ember, sitting in the warm overflow of the Ripple home, surrounded by people who love each other openly, and who have built a life that looks nothing like the life she was raised to build, absorbs this message even if she cannot quite articulate it. The flooding crisis, when it comes, is both the film's external climax and the catalyst for its emotional resolutions. The water infrastructure beneath Firetown fails comprehensively. Water begins to flood through the neighborhood. The threat is real and immediate and affects everyone. Homes begin to fill. Businesses are threatened. The community that took decades to build is at risk, and Bernie, at the center of it all, is fighting to save the shop and the flame. Bernie's determination to save the flame during the flooding is one of the most emotionally complex moments in the film because it shows us with complete clarity both the beauty and the limitation of his relationship to his past. The flame represents everything. It represents the home he left. It represents the courage it took to leave. It represents the culture he has tried to preserve. It represents, in the most concentrated possible form, the meaning of his life's work. And he is willing to put himself in serious danger to keep it burning. Ember sees her father in danger, and she acts. What she does in this moment is both physically extraordinary and emotionally significant. She uses her fire with a precision and control that is entirely new, not the explosive, uncontrolled outburst that has gotten her in trouble her whole life, not the wild flare that breaks things and damages relationships. This is fire directed by love and purpose and complete present attention. It is Ember at her most fully herself, fire channeled rather than merely happening. And it is Wade who helps her direct it. Wade who understands her well enough by this point to know how to support her without getting in her way. Together they protect Bernie and the shop and the flame. In the aftermath of the flooding crisis, with the immediate danger past and everyone safe, there's a moment of profound quiet between Bernie and Ember that the film has been building toward from its very opening frames. Bernie looks at his daughter. He has just watched her be extraordinary. He has watched her use everything she is in service of what she loves. And something shifts in him that has been building slowly throughout the film. Something that his pride and his hope and his fear of losing what he has built has been sitting on top of. Bernie tells Ember that he needs to say something to her. And what he says, in the language of fire elementals that Ember grew up hearing, is that he did not work his whole life and cross an ocean and build a shop from nothing in order to give his daughter a cage. He did it so that she would have a foundation to stand on, a place to come from, something solid beneath her feet. He wanted to give her the shop because he thought it was the best thing he had. But if she has found something better, something that is truly hers in a way the shop has never quite been, then choosing that is not a betrayal of what he built. It is, in the deepest possible sense, exactly what he built it for. This is the emotional climax of Elemental, not the flooding, not the romance. This conversation between a father and his daughter about what it actually means to love someone completely. Bernie is not abandoning his culture or his values or his community. He is expanding his understanding of what his love for Ember has always been asking of him. He is discovering that the love he has for his daughter is large enough to include her freedom, large enough to include her choosing herself, large enough to celebrate rather than mourn the fact that she is going to become her own person. Ember cries. Bernie cries. The audience cries. And then Ember goes to find Wade. What she says to Wade is simple and completely honest. She tells him that she wants to be with him. She tells him that she is going to pursue her art, going to take the opportunity she has been offered to study glassblowing formally, going to go toward a life that she has been quietly dreaming about. And she tells him that she wants him to be part of this life even as it changes and grows. Wade, who has been waiting for Ember to find her way to this moment with the patient love of someone who refuses to hurry the people they care about, is overwhelmed. He cries, which is to say that water pours out of him in great emotional streams, and he holds onto this moment with everything he has. The film ends with Ember leaving for new horizons, not running away from her family, but moving toward her own future with her family's blessing. It ends with the Fireplace continuing, with Bernie and Cinder and the community they have built still present and still thriving. And it ends with Ember and Wade together, in that impossible steam space between their two elements, finding a way to exist in the same place that the world said could not exist. Character analysis. Ember Lumen is one of the most carefully and completely drawn characters in Pixar's recent work. The temptation in creating a character like Ember, a passionate young woman with a temper and a hidden artistic gift and a complicated relationship with her family's expectations, is to simplify her, to make her anger a simple flaw she overcomes, to make her art a simple passion she needs to pursue, to make her relationship with her father a simple conflict between tradition and modernity. But the film resists all of these simplifications and gives us instead a character of genuine complexity and internal contradiction. Ember's anger is the most interesting thing about her, and understanding it properly is crucial to understanding the whole film. Her fire, her emotional explosiveness, is not separate from her other qualities. It is the same fire that fuels her creativity. It is the same fire that makes her devoted and passionate. It is the same fire that lets her protect the people she loves when everything is on the line. You cannot take the destructive versions of her fire away without also taking the creative and loving versions. They are the same energy in different expressions. The film understands this deeply, and it is why Ember's arc is not about learning to suppress her fire, but about learning to direct it, about finding the trust and the safety and the self-knowledge that allow her to choose how her fire expresses itself, rather than having it just happen to her and to the people around her. The relationship between Ember's fire and her art is particularly rich symbolically. Glass is made from sand and fire. It is a product of transformation, something that cannot exist without the application of intense heat. When Ember makes glass, she is not just making art. She is making something that could not exist without what she uniquely is. Her fire does not just enable the art. The art requires her specific kind of fire. This is the film's way of telling us that Ember's gift is not despite her nature, but because of it. The thing that seems like her biggest problem, the explosive, uncontrolled fire, the emotional intensity that gets her in trouble, is also the source of the most beautiful thing she can create. Ember's relationship with her cultural identity is another thread that runs through her character with real sophistication. She is fully and proudly fire elemental. She knows the language, the customs, the history, the foods, the cultural practices. She is her father's daughter in the deepest sense. And this identity is not something she needs to abandon or leave behind in order to grow. The film is very careful about this. Ember's journey is not a story about assimilation, about trading one identity for another. It is a story about expansion, about discovering that you can be all of who you are rather than only the parts that fit into a predetermined role. Wade Ripple deserves as much analytical attention as Ember, though he operates somewhat differently as a character. Wade's most obvious quality is his emotional openness, and it is worth spending time on what this means in the context of the film's themes. In a story largely about people who have difficulty expressing or acknowledging what they truly feel and want, Wade is a character who has almost no barrier between his internal emotional state and his external expression. He feels something and it comes out immediately. He cries easily. He is delighted easily. He is moved by beauty without any self-consciousness about it. This quality could be played as comic relief and nothing more. The goofy crying waterman who provides lightness alongside Ember's intensity. But the film is much smarter than that. Wade's emotional openness is presented as a genuine strength, as something valuable and rare. In the world of the film, as in the real world, men, and particularly men in cultures and communities that prize toughness and endurance, are often not encouraged to be emotionally open. The fire community that Ember comes from certainly prizes strength and fortitude over emotional expressiveness. And the contrast between Ember's family's emotional register and Wade's is part of what makes their relationship challenging, and also what makes it transformative for Ember. But as we noted earlier, Wade also has his own depths that the film reveals gradually. There is grief in his past. Something has been allowing himself to flow around rather than through. And there are moments in the film where Ember, with her characteristic directness, helps Wade face something he has been avoiding. The influence between them genuinely goes both ways. She helps her with the things that water cannot manage alone, things that require fire's directness and heat. He helps her with the things that fire cannot manage alone, things that require water's patience and flow. The evolution of their relationship from reluctant partnership to genuine connection is traced with real care. The film does not rush it. It builds through the accumulation of shared experiences, through the quiet moments of recognition, through the growing awareness each of them has that this person understands them in ways they did not expect to be understood. There is a specific moment, early in their relationship, when Ember is working with glass, and Wade watches with that expression of pure wonder, and something passes between them that both of them feel, and neither of them has language for yet. That moment, that recognition, is the seed of everything that follows. Bernie Lumen is the most emotionally complex adult character in the film, and his arc is as important as Ember's even though it receives less screen time. Bernie is a man whose entire adult life has been defined by the project of building something in a place that was not entirely welcoming to him. He arrived with nothing and built something real through sheer force of will and love and labor. And the thing he built, the shop and the community around it and the life for his family, is genuinely beautiful and genuinely worth being proud of. The difficulty with Bernie is that the very qualities that allowed him to build what he built, his single-mindedness, his devotion to his vision, his inability to accept failure or deviation from the plan, are also the qualities that create the cage around Ember. Bernie's expectations for Ember are not selfish in any cynical or calculated way. He genuinely believes the shop is the best life he can give her. He genuinely believes that taking over the Fireplace is what Ember was made for. He is not wrong about Ember's capabilities. She is genuinely gifted at running the shop. The problem is that being capable of something is not the same as being called to it. The film treats Bernie's difficulty with real compassion. It does not present him as an obstacle for Ember to overcome or a problem to be solved. It presents him as a fully formed human being or fire being who is doing the best he knows how with the love he has and the fears he carries. The fear that runs beneath his expectations is real. He came to a country that was not built for him. He built something from nothing. And the thing he fears most, at some level he cannot quite articulate, is that all of it will dissolve if the family does not hold together the way he has imagined it. Ember's mother, Cinder, is worth more attention than she often receives in discussions of the film. Cinder is quieter than Bernie and takes up less space in the narrative, but she is not a passive character. She is, in many ways, the emotional intelligence of the family. She watches things with a perceptiveness that Bernie sometimes lacks in his intensity. She understands Ember in ways that she perhaps does not always articulate. And her quiet presence in scenes where Bernie and Ember are in conflict carries a lot of unspoken meaning. Cinder is the person who holds a family together in an emotional sense, who maintains the warmth and the connection, who keeps the love circulating even when the pressures of the shop and the expectations and the responsibilities threaten to crowd it out. The relationship between Ember and Cinder is underdeveloped relative to the father-daughter relationship, which is one of the film's genuine limitations. There are scenes between them that suggest a depth of understanding that is never fully explored. Cinder seems to know things about Ember's inner life that Bernie does not see. She seems to carry a kind of empathy for Ember's situation that she perhaps cannot fully express without disrupting the family's equilibrium. A fuller exploration of this relationship would have enriched the film significantly. Themes and symbolism. The immigrant experience is not the background of Elemental. It is the substance of it. Every major element of the film's story and world building grows from the specific reality of what it means to leave one world and try to build a life in another. Bernie and Cinder's arrival in Element City is not just a prologue. It is a foundation upon which every subsequent event rests. Understanding the full weight of that arrival and the full weight of everything they built afterward is what gives Ember's struggle its moral seriousness. The film draws from the immigrant experience at every level of its narrative. Bernie and Cinder's decision to leave their homeland was not made lightly. The film does not show us exactly what drove them to leave, but the suggestion is that the Fire homeland, while beloved, did not offer the future they wanted for their family. The choice to leave a home, to carry it with you in memory and in small physical artifacts like the flame in the shop window, while also committing to build something new in an uncertain place, is one of the most consequential choices a person can make, and it shapes everything that comes after it in ways that ripple forward through generations. Firetown as a created community is one of the film's richest pieces of world building precisely because it captures something true about how immigrant neighborhoods actually form and what they actually mean. Firetown is not just a place where fire elementals happen to live. It is a deliberate construction, a collective act of community building by people who needed a place where they could be fully themselves. The culture and the customs and the language that you can feel in Firetown are not just decorative details. They are the substance of a community that made itself out of necessity and love. And the film understands that such communities are both precious and limiting, that the same togetherness that sustains and supports can also, if held too tightly, become a pressure that makes it hard to breathe. The neglect of Firetown's infrastructure by the city government is a pointed and accurate piece of social commentary. In real cities, immigrant neighborhoods have historically received less public investment, less attention to infrastructure, less responsiveness from government services than more affluent or more established neighborhoods. This pattern is so consistent and so well documented that it barely qualifies as controversial. The film incorporates this reality into its world building not as a lecture, but as a simple fact of how Element City works, communicated through the visual detail of old pipes and inadequate maintenance, and a neighborhood left to manage its own problems. The casual acceptance of this inequality, the way it has simply become the background of daily life for the fire community, is as true to the immigrant experience as anything else in the film. The theme of first-generation identity, of being born into a culture and a community that is not quite the dominant culture of the society you inhabit, runs through Ember's character with particular depth. Ember grew up in Firetown, but she also grew up in Element City. She belongs to both and fully to neither. She knows the fire language, but she also thinks in the common language of the city. She carries the cultural knowledge and practices of her parents, but she has also been shaped by the broader world they brought her into. This double belonging, or double half belonging, is one of the most defining experiences of the first-generation child, and the film renders it with unusual specificity and care. What does it mean to honor your parents without losing yourself? This is a question at the heart of Elemental, and it is a question that does not have a simple answer. The film is very careful not to present Bernie as wrong and Ember as right. Bernie's dream for Ember comes from love, from the deep parental desire to give your child the best possible life, from the belief formed through hard experience that stability and community and a place of your own are among the most valuable things in the world. These are not foolish or misguided values. They are profound ones. The problem is not that Bernie values what he values. The problem is that he has not quite seen that Ember might have her own profound values that differ from his. The resolution of this question in the film is beautiful precisely because it does not require either Ember or Bernie to surrender what they believe in. Bernie does not stop valuing the shop or the community or the cultural continuity it represents. Ember does not abandon her family or pretend that her heritage does not matter to her. What shifts is Bernie's understanding of what his love for Ember actually means in practice. Real parental love, the film suggests, is not about giving your child the life you wish you had had. It is about clearing the ground so they can build the life they were made for. This is harder than it sounds. It requires setting aside the specific form of the dream while holding on to its spirit. The central romance of the film is built on a metaphor that works on multiple levels simultaneously. Fire and water cannot coexist. They cancel each other out. This is not just a physical fact in the world of the film. It is also a social and cultural fact. Fire elementals and water elementals do not typically form deep relationships. They inhabit different parts of the city, have different customs and rhythms, move through the world in fundamentally different ways. The impossibility of Ember and Wade's connection is therefore not just a physical challenge. It is a social and cultural one. And the film's suggestion that this impossible connection is possible after all is also a suggestion about the broader social reality, that the categories we use to separate people from each other are often less permanent and less absolute than they appear. The steam that Ember and Wade create when their elements meet in just the right way is the film's central and most powerful symbol. Steam is not fire and not water. It is a third thing, something that did not exist before their interaction and would not exist without both of them. It rises. It fills space. It is insubstantial in a way that makes it seem fragile, but it is actually a form of enormous energy and power. Every steam engine in the history of the industrial world was powered by exactly this transformation, fire and water creating something that moves the world. And the film is using this fact deliberately. Ember and Wade together do not just make something beautiful. They make something powerful, something with the potential to move things. Glass, as we touched on earlier, carries extraordinary symbolic weight throughout the film. Glass is created by the application of fire to sand, which is an earth element material, to produce something that is transparent and shaped and beautiful. The transparency is crucial. Glass does not hide what is behind it. Glass lets light through. Glass, in the physical world, is one of humanity's most important inventions precisely because it allows visibility without exposure to the elements. You can see clearly through glass while remaining protected. And in the story of a character who has been hiding her true self for her entire adult life, who has been keeping her creative passion a secret because she did not think was allowed, the fact that her art produces transparency is deeply significant. Making glass is Ember's way of becoming visible. of allowing people to see through the surface of her competence and duty to the creative and vulnerable person beneath. Light is another running symbolic thread in the film. Fire is a source of light. It illuminates, and in the broader symbolic language of storytelling, light is always associated with truth, with revelation, with seeing clearly. Ember is literally a source of light, and her journey through the film is a journey toward allowing herself to be seen, toward bringing her own light out of hiding, toward illuminating the truth of who she is rather than keeping contained in the dark. Wade, who is transparent by nature, who allows light to pass through him rather than generating his own, is in some ways the perfect partner for someone who generates light, but has been afraid to let it out. He does not compete with her light. He lets it pass through him, amplifying and distributing it. The city itself, Element City, functions symbolically as the world in its broadest sense, the society that individuals must navigate and negotiate with. It is a place of enormous possibility and real beauty, but also of inequality and exclusion. It is a place that welcomes some people fully and others only partially. It is a place that rewards certain kinds of difference while being suspicious of others. And it is a place that is capable of change, that can be pushed toward greater fairness and inclusion by people willing to do the work. The resolution of the flooding crisis involves the city being compelled to address the infrastructure inequality it has allowed persist in Firetown. The fire community is not just saved from flooding by Ember and Wade's heroics. They are moved to a position where the broader city has to reckon with what it has allowed. This is not a revolutionary conclusion, but it is a realistic and honest one. Change happens incrementally, through persistent advocacy and through individuals building bridges across boundaries that the world said could not be crossed. One of the most rewarding things you can do as a viewer of Elemental is to watch it multiple times with a specific intention of paying attention to the background, not to the main characters and not to the central plot, but to the world itself, to the details of Element City that exist in the corners of frames and in the design of spaces that the camera passes through quickly. Because what Pixar built for this film is not just a backdrop. It is a fully realized civilization with internal logic, social history, cultural texture, and visual detail that rewards close and repeated attention in ways that most animated films simply do not. Element City is built around a central premise that 4 distinct types of beings, fire, water, earth, and air, have come together in a single urban environment. But the film is smart enough to understand that coexistence is not the same as integration, and that a city built by and from multiple communities will inevitably show the marks of both cooperation and tension in its physical design. The architecture of Element City reflects this truth in every neighborhood you visit. The central parts of the city, the commercial districts and civic spaces, are designed with a kind of deliberate universality that is itself a form of compromise. Public spaces that accommodate all types of elementals have to solve genuine physical problems. Fire elementals need dry environments. Water elementals thrive in wet ones. Earth elementals want solid ground and growing things. Air elementals drift through spaces without engaging with surfaces in a way the other elements do. A public square that works for all 4 types requires architectural creativity that is visible in the film's background design. You can see retractable canopies that protect fire elementals from water-based weather. You can see elevated walkways that allow different types to move through the same space without direct contact. You can see the clever engineering of buildings that have sections designed for different elements, with transitions and buffers built into the architecture. But these universal spaces also have a quality of the generic that is quite different from the more culturally specific neighborhoods. The central city feels designed by committee, optimized for function rather than for belonging. It is impressive but not warm. It is accommodating but not inviting. And this visual distinction between the universal spaces and the community spaces is one of the ways the film communicates its social commentary without stating it directly. The water district of Element City are among the most visually spectacular environments in the film. Water elementals live in spaces that are genuinely aquatic, where channels and pools and flowing waterways replace streets and corridors. Buildings in water districts are designed to be beautiful when seen through water, with curved surfaces and reflective materials and translucent structures that allow the constant movement of water to become part of the architecture rather than a challenge to it. The aesthetic is cool and luminous and profoundly beautiful in a way that is completely different from the warm density of Firetown. The water districts also communicate something about class and privilege in Element City. They are among the most beautiful and most expensive parts of the city. The Ripple family lives in a comfortable and affluent section of the water district, in a home that is full of flowing channels and beautiful aquatic plants, and a kind of abundant decorative water that signals prosperity. This is not accidental. The water community in Element City is presented as more economically established, more integrated into the city's power structures, more comfortable in the city's official spaces than the fire community. Wade moves through Element City with the ease of someone who belongs everywhere. Ember moves through it with the careful awareness of someone who belongs only in certain places. The Earth Elemental neighborhoods, while not essential to the film story, are visible in background details that are completely charming. Earth Elementals have built neighborhoods that are deeply integrated with natural growth, with plants and soil and a kind of organic, messy abundance that comes from people who literally grow things everywhere they live. Their buildings are often partially buried or covered in living vegetation. Their streets have trees growing through them. Their community spaces are gardens and groves as much as plazas and markets. There is a settled, deep-rooted quality to the Earth Elemental neighborhoods that contrasts interestingly with both the flowing dynamism of the water districts and the warm intensity of Firetown. Air Elementals, appropriately, occupy the highest parts of Element City. Their neighborhoods are in towers and on elevated platforms and in spaces that catch the wind. Air Elemental architecture is minimal and open, designed to allow air to flow through freely rather than to contain or protect. Where fire elemental spaces feel enclosed and warm, and where water spaces feel flowing and abundant, air spaces feel exposed and light and slightly vertiginous. There is something inherently transitory about them, as if the community that lives there is always slightly in motion, always ready to be carried somewhere else by the wind. The transportation systems of Element City are one of the most creative pieces of world building in the film. Different elementals move through the city in different ways because their physical natures allow and require different modes of transit. Water elementals can travel through the city's water pipe system, which is essentially a network of pneumatic tubes filled with water that allows Wade and others like him to move from place to place with extraordinary speed. This is why Wade ends up in the Fireplace basement in the first place. He was traveling to the pipe system and got knocked off course by Ember's fire breaking through the wall. Fire elementals, who cannot travel through water systems, have developed their own transportation networks that use different physical principles. There are heated rail systems in Firetown that fire elementals can ride without discomfort. There are elevated roadways that stay dry and protected from the city's water infrastructure. The care that has gone into thinking through these practical problems of a multi-element city is part of what makes Element City feel genuinely real rather than merely decorative. The market areas of Element City, where different elemental communities trade with each other, are among the most visually rich and socially interesting spaces in the film. These are the spaces where the different communities most directly encounter each other, and the design of these markets reflects both the possibilities and the challenges of that encounter. There are goods from every elemental culture on sale. There are food stalls serving cuisine that has been adapted to accommodate customers from different elemental backgrounds, which requires some genuinely creative culinary and architectural solutions. A food market serving both fire and water customers cannot use the same counters and cooking methods for both. The practical solutions a film invents for these problems are imaginative and funny, and also genuinely illuminating about what it takes to actually accommodate difference rather than just tolerating it. Firetown, as we have discussed in earlier sections, deserves its own extended analysis because it is the most personally felt and most emotionally loaded environment in the film. The neighborhood was built by fire elementals for fire elementals in a city that did not initially welcome them, and every visual detail of Firetown carries its history. The buildings are close together, built for warmth and community rather than for display. The streets are narrow and winding, following the logic of how a community actually grows rather than any planned grid. The shop fronts are laden with goods and with cultural signifiers that immediately tell you where these people came from and what they are determined not to forget. The Fireplace shop itself is a masterwork of set design. Every shelf, every product, every detail of the shop's visual presentation communicates something about Bernie's character and about the culture he is trying to preserve. The products are not generic fire goods. They are specific cultural artifacts, food items and textiles and tools and decorative objects that carry particular cultural meaning. The shop smells, or at least you feel that it would smell, of particular spices and incenses that speak of a specific place and a specific way of life. The arrangement of the shop reflects Bernie's personality, organized and purposeful, but also rich with accumulated detail, a place where nothing is purely functional because everything also carries meaning. The flame in the window of the fireplace is the visual anchor of the entire Firetown section of the film. Every time you see it, burning steadily in its position of honor, you are reminded of everything it represents. It is a small thing visually, a single flame in a single window, in a single shop, in a single neighborhood, in a vast city. But the film gives it enormous weight through the care with which it is treated by the characters and through the significance of the threaded faces during the flooding. That small flame is carrying the weight of an entire people's journey. The seasonal and atmospheric variation in Element City is another piece of world building that adds significant texture. The film takes place across what appears to be a fairly compressed period of time, but even within that compression, you can see the city responding to different atmospheric conditions in ways that affect different elemental communities differently. Rainy days are both beautiful and concerning in a city with fire elementals. Windy days transform the air districts. The play of light across the different elemental neighborhoods at different times of day creates a visual diversity that keeps the city from ever feeling monotonous. The civic infrastructure of Element City, the government buildings, the inspection offices where Wade works, the council chambers where Ember and Wade present their findings about the flooding risk, tells a story of institutional power that is consistent with the film's broader social commentary. These civic spaces are dominated by the aesthetic sensibilities of the water and earth communities, the communities that have been in Element City longer and that have more political and economic power. Fire elemental culture is not well represented in the visual language of the civic spaces. The people who design these buildings and who move through them most comfortably are not from Firetown. Wade's workplace, the city inspection office, is a particularly interesting environment. It is quintessentially bureaucratic in the best possible sense, a space designed for efficient process and official procedure. And yet Wade, who is fundamentally a creature of flow and ease and warmth, occupies it with a comfort that tells you something about his social position. He belongs here in a way that Ember, when she enters this space, clearly does not. She is out of her element, literally. And the film uses this spatial discomfort to communicate something about how different communities experience official institutions. Elemental has been discussed primarily as a film about the immigrant experience and about family dynamics, and rightly so. But the social commentary in the film is broader and more systematically developed than these two themes alone suggest. Looking at the film through a wider lens reveals a coherent and thoughtful engagement with questions of urban inequality, community power, institution neglect, and the politics of belonging that are worth examining carefully. The most fundamental social fact established by Element City is that different communities exist in a state of formal coexistence that falls considerably short of genuine equality. All four elemental types have legal status in Element City. All four communities are nominally citizens with equal rights under the law. But the social and economic reality is significantly more complex. And the film is honest about this complexity in ways that do not resolve into simple conclusions. The fire elemental community sits in a specific position in this social hierarchy. They are not the newest arrivals. They have been in Element City long enough to have built a substantial neighborhood and a functioning community economy. They are not without resources or community strength, but they remain in certain important respects outside the mainstream of the city's power structures. Their neighborhood is physically at the edge of the city. Their infrastructure is older and less well-maintained. Their cultural practices are not well represented in the city's public life, and they carry as a community the accumulated experience of society that was not initially welcoming to them. This position, established and yet still marginal, integrated and yet still other, is one that many real-world immigrant communities would immediately recognize. It is a position of a community that has made a home somewhere through effort and persistence and community solidarity, while also never being allowed to fully forget that this place was not originally made for them. The fire community in Element City has made Firetown into something genuinely beautiful and meaningful and worth being proud of. But they did not make Firetown by being welcomed into the city's full life. They made it by finding a corner of the city where they could exist on their own terms. The water infrastructure neglect that drives the film's plot is a microcosm of this broader inequality. Element City's water pipe system was built and has been maintained by the city government. It runs throughout the city, carrying water to water elementals and carrying waste away from all communities. But the section that runs through Firetown is old and deteriorating. It has not been upgraded when other parts of the city's water system have been upgraded. The reasons for this are not stated explicitly in the film, but they do not need to be. The pattern is immediately recognizable. When a government consistently underinvests in a particular neighborhood while maintaining and upgrading other areas, the message sent to that neighborhood's residents is clear. You are not the priority. Your needs are not urgent. What you have will have to be enough. The fact that this underinvestment has created a flooding risk that could destroy Firetown, that the city's neglect of its own infrastructure has created a literal existential threat to the fire community, is the film's most pointed piece of social commentary. The threat to Firetown is not coming from outside the system. It is coming from inside it. It is the accumulated result of ordinary institutional decisions made by ordinary officials who simply did not treat Firetown's infrastructure as a priority. And the result of those ordinary decisions is an extraordinary threat to a community that has already given so much to build a life in this city. The response of the city government to the flooding risk, when Ember and Wade bring it to their attention, is another piece of accurate social observation. The government does respond. It is not indifferent, but its response comes slowly, requires significant advocacy to initiate, and comes with conditions that feel threatening to the community's autonomy. The fix the city proposes for the water infrastructure problem will address the immediate danger, but also involve significant intervention in Firetown. The fire community will have to accept changes to their neighborhood that they did not initiate and do not fully control in order to get the city to do what it should have been doing all along. This is a classic bind that underserved communities face when dealing with institutional neglect. You need the institution to act to solve the problem. But the institution acting means accepting its terms, its timeline, its definition of the solution. And those terms may not always respect the community's own understanding of what it needs or its own ability to solve its problems on its own terms. The film does not resolve this bind cleanly. It acknowledges it as the complex reality it is. The relationship between Wade and Ember is also, at a social level, a relationship across significant social privilege. Wade is a water elemental in a city where water elementals are more comfortable, more established, more naturally at home in the city's official spaces and social structures. He moves through the city with ease. He has a stable government job. His family lives in a comfortable part of the water district. He is, by any reasonable measure, in a more privileged social position than Ember, and the film is quietly aware of this without making it the explicit subject of the romance. Wade's ability to help Ember navigate the city's bureaucracy, to get the flooding problem taken seriously by city officials, to open doors that Ember could not open on her own, reflects this real social dynamic. It is not that Ember is incapable. She is obviously enormously capable. It is that the system is more responsive to Wade than to Ember, because the system was built by and for people more like Wade than like Ember. This is a realistic and honest portrayal of how social privilege actually operates, not through individual malice, but through structural patterns that advantage some people and disadvantage others in ways that are deeply ordinary and therefore deeply persistent. The air elemental community, which appears in the film primarily as background detail, represents another social position worth noting. Air elementals are the most literally invisible of the elemental communities, transparent and difficult to see, easily overlooked. Their presence in Element City is certain, but their social weight seems minimal. They float through the city without making much an impression on the spaces they inhabit. There is something in this portrayal that suggests the air community's experience of invisibility is a form of social disadvantage of its own kind, different from the fire community's experience of being too visible and too other, but equally limiting in its own way. The Earth Elemental community occupies a different social position again. Earth Elementals appear to be deeply rooted in Element City in the most literal sense. Their neighborhoods are the most established, their roots most literally sunk into the soil of the city. They have the solidity and permanence that comes with deep roots. But this rootedness can also be a kind of conservatism, a resistance to the change that the other communities bring. The Earth community is perhaps the most Eltonian in the sense of being most identified with and most comfortable in the city as it already exists. These social dynamics among the four communities are never made the explicit subject of the film's dialogue or its plot. They exist in the background, in the design of spaces, in the way different characters move through the world, in the small details of how different communities interact. This is exactly the right way to handle social commentary in a film whose primary register is personal and emotional rather than political. The social reality is present and honest, but it supports the personal story rather than overwhelming it. The fire elemental culture that Peter Sohn created for Elemental is one of the most richly detailed aspects of the film's world, and it deserves extended attention because so much of the film's emotional resonance depends on understanding what this culture is, what it values, and what it costs to carry it. Fire elemental culture, as the film presents it, is built on a set of values that reflect the specific experience of a community that has had to be strong in order to survive. Endurance is valued. Persistence in the face of difficulty is valued. The ability to keep burning even when circumstances try to put you out is valued above almost everything else. These values are not arbitrary. They grew from real experience, from the experience of community that left its homeland and had to build something new in a place that was not always welcoming. The qualities that allowed the fire community to do this, the toughness and the determination and the refusal to be extinguished, are genuinely admirable and genuinely necessary. They are not the values of weakness or fear. They are the values of people who have survived difficult things. But every value system that develops in response to adversity carries within it the shadow of its origins. The fire community's emphasis on strength and endurance can also make it difficult to acknowledge weakness or uncertainty or the need for help. The premium placed on persistence can make it hard to admit when a particular path is wrong and needs to be abandoned. The pride in cultural continuity, the fierce protection of what was brought from the homeland, can shade from beautiful preservation into constraining rigidity if it is not balanced by openness to change. Bernie embodies both the best and the most challenging aspects of fire elemental culture. His strength, his endurance, his determination to build something that will last are genuinely heroic qualities. The shop he built, the life he made for his family, the community he is part of, these are real achievements that came from real cultural values being applied with real dedication. And his attachment to those values, his difficulty in stepping back far enough to see when they are functioning as limitations rather than foundations, is also completely understandable given what those values have meant in his life. The language of the fire elementals in the film is a beautiful piece of cultural world building. The fire language is warm and particular, with specific words and phrases that do not translate directly into the common language of Element City. When Bernie and Cinder speak the fire language, there is an intimacy and a specificity to their communication that the common language does not carry. The words they use for each other, the specific forms of address, the particular expressions of care and concern, all of these carry cultural weight that cannot be fully conveyed in translation. This is true of real languages and real cultures. And the film's sensitivity to this fact is one of the things that makes its portrayal of cultural identity feel genuine rather than superficial. The customs around fire elemental celebrations and rituals are glimpsed in the film in ways that suggest depth without fully exploring it. The community gathering where Bernie announces Ember's taking over the shop has specific cultural forms that are clearly meaningful to the people present, even if the audience does not know their full history. The way the flame is tended and honored in the shop has the quality of genuine ritual practice, of something that has been done the same way for generations and whose meaning is carried in the repetition as much as in any single instance. The food of the fire elemental culture is one of the most charming aspects of Firetown's world building. The Fireplace sells cultural foods from the fire homeland, and the names and appearances of these foods suggest an entire culinary tradition. There are spiced and heated dishes, foods that carry the warmth and intensity of fire culture in their very substance. The food becomes a way of maintaining connection to home, of experiencing in the physical act of eating something of the place you left behind. This is extraordinarily true to the real experience of immigrant food culture, where specific dishes become repositories of memory and connection in ways that go far beyond their nutritional value. The relationship of fire elementals to their element, to fire itself, is also culturally specific in ways the film handles with care. Fire is not just the physical substance that fire elementals are made of. It is also their relationship to the world, their way of engaging with and responding to experience. Fire warms. Fire illuminates. Fire transforms. Fire can be destructive if uncontrolled. The fire elemental relationship to these qualities of fire is not merely physical, but deeply cultural. Fire elementals understand themselves through the metaphors of fire, and these metaphors shape how they think about strength and passion, and danger and care. The sacred flame that Bernie carried from the fire homeland is the most concentrated expression of his cultural relationship to fire. It is not just a flame. It is a fire that connects the present community to its past, the living link between the fire homeland that was left behind and the new life being built in Element City. Its continuous burning is a form of cultural memory. Every day it burns is another day of continuity, another day of the thread remaining unbroken. And the threat to that flame during the flooding is not just a threat to a physical object. It is a threat to the cultural continuity that the flame embodies. Peter Sohn's career at Pixar before directing Elemental is worth understanding in some detail because it illuminates the specific sensibility he brought to this film and why it came out the way it did. Sohn joined Pixar in the late 1990s and spent his early years at the studio as a story artist, contributing to some of the studio's most celebrated films of that era. Story artists at Pixar are the people who translate the narrative ideas of film into visual sequences, who figure out how a scene should move and feel, and what each moment within it should look like. It is a role that requires both visual creativity and deep storytelling instinct, and Sohn excelled at it. He contributed to films including The Incredibles and Ratatouille and Up in story artist roles, which means that his visual storytelling sensibility was formed by working on some of the most carefully crafted animated films ever made. He also did voice acting at Pixar, most notably as the voice of Emile, the enthusiastic and food-loving rat, who is Remy's brother in Ratatouille. This might seem like a minor footnote, but it is actually telling. Sohn's willingness to bring warmth and humor and genuine feeling to a supporting voice role speaks to the same qualities that define his directorial work. He is not a filmmaker who keeps his distance from the emotional material. He dives in. He commits. His first feature as director was The Good Dinosaur in 2015, a film that had an extraordinarily difficult production history involving multiple story overhauls and significant cast changes. The Good Dinosaur is not considered among Pixar's best, and its production struggles are well documented. But what Sohn was able to accomplish in that film, within the constraints of a troubled production, shows the same qualities that are more fully expressed in Elemental. A genuine tenderness for characters, a visual sense that is oriented toward natural beauty, an emotional directness that sometimes tips into sentimentality, but that comes from a real place. Between The Good Dinosaur and Elemental, Sohn was developing what would become Elemental for several years. The development was long and iterative and involved many versions of story in the world before arriving at the version we see. This extended development period is reflected in the finished film's coherence and depth. The world building of Element City feels like something that was thought through over a long time. The emotional architecture of the story has a layered quality that suggests many passes and many revisions. Sohn has spoken in interviews about the experience of working with the Pixar Story Trust during the development of Elemental, the group of senior Pixar storytellers who review and critique films in development and push filmmakers to dig deeper and be more honest. He has described the process as challenging in a way that genuinely useful creative feedback always is, because the notes that help you make a better film are often the notes that require you to look at things you are trying to avoid looking at. The Story Trust pushed Sohn to make the immigrant experience themes more specific and more personal, rather than keeping them at a comfortable level of generality. And the result of that push is visible in the finished film, where the personal truth is specific enough to be genuinely moving rather than vaguely relatable. Sohn's visual sensibility as a director is oriented toward warmth and beauty and the specific quality of light, in particular environments. He clearly loves the visual world of Firetown in a way that goes beyond professional craft interest. The way the camera lingers in that neighborhood, the way the light is handled in the shop, the care with which the community spaces are designed and shot, all of this speaks to a filmmaker who has a personal and emotional relationship with what he is depicting. He knows what this place feels like from the inside because he has lived in something like it. His handling of the romance between Ember and Wade is particularly confident for a filmmaker whose work has not previously centered on romantic love. Sohn understands that the romance is the vehicle through which the film's deeper themes are expressed, and that it needs to be both genuinely felt and symbolically loaded. He achieves both. The moments between Ember and Wade have real romantic charge, real warmth, real humor, and real emotional stakes. And they also carry the full weight of what the film is saying about difference and connection, and the possibility of creating something new from elements that were not supposed to be able to combine. Because Peter Sohn drew so explicitly from his own life and his own family's experience in creating Elemental, it is worth spending time examining how the film's narrative compares to the actual documented experience of immigrant families in the United States and in other countries that have received large immigrant populations. The experience of the first-generation immigrant family that the film depicts is remarkably consistent with what sociologists, psychologists, and historians have documented about real immigrant families across many different cultural and national contexts. The specific cultural details vary enormously. The emotional and social patterns repeat with striking regularity. The decision to leave the home country is almost never made lightly. Immigrants leave because they believe the future they can build somewhere else is better than the future available to them at home. This is not a rejection of the homeland. It is an act of love for the family, a willingness to endure enormous personal difficulty and loss in order to give the next generation better opportunities. Bernie and Cinder's decision to leave the fire homeland and come to Element City, carrying only what they could bring, and the flame that represented everything they were leaving behind, is exactly this kind of decision. The process of building something in a new place, which the film depicts in its prologue to the growth of the Fireplace from a rough beginning to a thriving community institution, is documented in remarkable detail across the literature on immigrant communities. Immigrant entrepreneurs, who are dramatically overrepresented among small business owners in many countries, tend to build businesses that serve their own communities first, providing goods and services that the mainstream economy does not offer to their community, but that are deeply needed and valued. The Fireplace, selling cultural goods from the fire homeland to fire elementals in Firetown, is exactly this kind of business. It is not just a commercial enterprise. It is a community institution, a place where people can access the things that connect them to who they are and where they came from. The expectation that children will continue the family business or otherwise honor the parents' sacrifice is one of the most consistently documented tensions in immigrant family life. The first generation, who build from nothing and sacrificed everything, often have a deep need for their children to carry forward what they have built. The continuation of the family enterprise is experienced as validation of the sacrifice, as proof that the leaving was worth it, as a form of cultural continuity. And children who choose different paths can sometimes be experienced by parents who hold this need very deeply, as a kind of rejection even when no rejection is intended. The children of immigrants navigate between their parents' cultural world and the broader society they were raised in, experience a specific kind of dual consciousness that has been extensively documented. They are members of both worlds and fully comfortable in neither. They know their parents' language and culture, but they also think and feel in the language and culture of the place they grew up. They understand the values and the customs of the immigrant community, and they understand the values and customs of the mainstream society. And they are often the translators between the two, the people who help the older generation navigate a society that does not always speak their language. Ember's position in Element City, as someone who knows Firetown deeply and the common culture of the city partially, who can move between these worlds but belongs fully to neither, is a portrait of this dual consciousness that is rendered with real accuracy. She knows things about the fire community that people outside it do not know and cannot easily access. She knows things about the broader city that her parents, who stay primarily within Firetown and within their community, do not fully know. This dual knowledge is both a gift and a weight. The intergenerational transmission of trauma and resilience is another dimension of the immigrant experience that the film touches on. Communities that have experienced displacement and difficulty and the challenges of building a life in a new place carry that history in their cultural practices and their emotional patterns. The fire community's emphasis on strength and endurance is not just an abstract cultural value. It is the accumulated wisdom of a community that has had to be strong in order to survive. And it is transmitted to each generation not primarily through explicit teaching, but through the texture of daily life, through the way adults model resilience, through the community practices that celebrate endurance and persistence. Ember has absorbed this cultural transmission completely. Her instinct when things go wrong is to push harder, to be stronger, to endure more. Her difficulty with acknowledging weakness or asking for help or admitting that a particular path is not right for her is part of this cultural inheritance. She is not being rigid or foolish when she struggles to assert her own needs. She is being a faithful child of her culture, living by the values she was raised with. What she needs and what Wade and the broader experience of the film gives her is a safe enough space to discover that those values, while genuinely important, are not the only values we're holding. There's another way to read Elemental that sits alongside all the readings we have already done, and that adds something important to the understanding of the film. Elemental is not just about Ember finding herself. It is also, and perhaps most essentially, a love letter to immigrant parents, to the specific kind of love that immigrant parents have for their children, and to the specific form that love takes. Bernie Luman is not a perfect father. He has expectations that constrain his daughter. He has difficulty seeing her as separate from the role he has imagined for her. He has, without meaning to, placed on her shoulders a weight that is not entirely fair. These are real limitations, and the film is honest about them. But Bernie is also someone who crossed an ocean for his family, who worked every day for decades to build something real, who treated his community with dignity and care, who taught his daughter everything he knew about who she was and where she came from, who loved her with a completeness and a constancy that she has always been able to count on. These are not small things. These are enormous things. And the film holds both the limitation and the love simultaneously, without letting either one cancel the other out. The moment when Bernie tells Ember that he did not build a shop to give her a cage is the most important moment in the film, because it is the moment when a parent loves his child enough to revise his own understanding of what that love requires. It is easy to love someone when loving them means giving them what you want to give. It is much harder to love someone in a way that requires giving up your own vision of their life, your own dream for them, and replacing it with trust in their ability to know themselves better than you do. That harder love is what Bernie finds at the end of the film, and the film honors it completely. For viewers who are themselves parents, this is perhaps the most moving aspect of Elemental. The film is asking parents to examine whether their love for their children is big enough to include the children's freedom to become people they did not expect, whether the dream they have for their child is truly for the child or partly for themselves, whether they can hold their love open enough to include the possibility that their child is right about themselves in ways the parent cannot fully see. For viewers who are children, regardless of age, the film is asking something slightly different. It is asking whether they can hold both things at once. The genuine love their parents have for them, and the genuine limitations of that love. The real sacrifices their parents have made, and the ways those sacrifices can become a currency of obligation if they are not careful. Whether they can honor their parents without hollowing themselves out in the service of that honor. These are not questions with easy answers. Elemental does not pretend they are, but it holds the space for both parents and children to feel themselves in the story, to recognize their own experience in the faces of fire elementals in an animated city, and perhaps to find in that recognition a little more compassion for both themselves and the people they love. For viewers who saw Elemental when it first came out and walked away with a positive but not overwhelmingly enthusiastic response, there is a strong case to be made for returning to the film. This is a movie that tends to improve with additional viewings, and for a specific reason. The first time you watch Elemental, you are processing a lot of new information. The world of Element City, the visual design, the elemental physics, the character relationships, the narrative structure, all of this is new and requires cognitive processing that can sometimes work against the emotional experience. On a second viewing, when the world is already known and the narrative is already mapped, the emotional experience of the film tends to hit significantly harder. You are no longer trying to figure out what is happening. You can simply be present with what the characters are feeling. And when you can do that, the film reveals depths that the first viewing might not have fully communicated. In particular, the early scenes of Bernie and Cinder arriving in Element City take on an entirely different quality on subsequent viewings. When you already know where the story is going, when you already know how Bernie's dream will shape Ember's life, watching him step off that boat with nothing but determination and a flame from home is genuinely heartbreaking in a way it might not be the first time through. You know what he is walking toward. You know what he will build and what it will cost and what he will ask of his daughter because of it. And all of that knowledge makes the simplicity of that arrival moment, the pure vulnerability and hope of it, profoundly moving. The greenhouse scene between Ember and Wade, where they discover that their elements can create something new together, is another scene that rewards second and third viewings. On the first viewing, it is beautiful and emotionally resonant. On subsequent viewings, knowing where the relationship is going and how hard it will be, and what Ember will ultimately have to give up and gain to honor what she discovered in that moment, the scene becomes almost unbearably tender. It is the moment the film turns. The moment before is one story. The moment after is another. And being able to sit in that turning point with full awareness of what it means is one of the specific pleasures that repeated viewing provides. The film also rewards attention to background details in ways that only become fully apparent on second viewings. The social dynamics of Element City, the class and power differentials between different elemental communities, are visible in background details that you might not fully register the first time. The care that has gone into making Firetown feel like a real place, a place with history and texture, and the accumulated evidence of lives lived in it, is something you absorb gradually rather than immediately. And the specific emotional texture of the Lumen family, the specific way love operates in that family, and what it costs and what it gives, is something that becomes richer with each viewing. As we come to the end of this extended analysis, it is worth asking what Elemental's lasting significance might be. What will it mean in 5 or 10 or 20 years? What place will it occupy in the history of animated film and in the broader culture? These are genuinely uncertain questions, but there are some things that seem clear. Elemental will be remembered as a significant technical achievement. The simulation of fire and water characters with a level of emotional expressiveness that the film achieves will be studied and cited in the history of computer animation. The tools developed for this film have already influenced subsequent work at Pixar and elsewhere in the industry. Elemental will also be remembered as an important film in the broader project of expanding the range of experiences and communities represented in mainstream animated film. The specific cultural territory explores the first-generation immigrant experience, the Korean-American family story translated into the language of fire elementals, is territory that a major Hollywood studio had not previously explored with this level of specificity and personal investment. And the film's success, modest by blockbuster standards but genuine and growing over time, has demonstrated that audiences respond to this kind of specificity with genuine enthusiasm rather than the indifference that studios sometimes fear. For the specific communities whose experiences the film draws from, Elemental holds a different kind of significance. The film's representation of the immigrant family experience, its honest and compassionate portrayal of the pressures and the love and the complexity of that experience, has meant something real to real people. That is not a small or easily quantifiable impact, but it is perhaps the most important thing a film can do, to make people feel that their lives and their stories are worth telling and worth seeing on the largest screens in the world. Peter Sohn made a film about his parents, about the shop they ran and the sacrifices they made and the love they had for their children and the difficulty and the beauty of carrying a culture across an ocean and building a new life without losing the old one. He made it in the form of an animated fantasy about fire and water elementals in a city that does not quite know how to make room for everyone who has come to live in it. And somehow, through the alchemy of personal truth translated into universal story, through the extraordinary craft of a studio that has spent decades learning how to make audiences feel deeply about animated characters, this very specific and very personal film became something that a great many people recognized as being about their own lives. That is what great storytelling does. It begins in the specific and arrives at the universal. It begins with one family's story and becomes a story about all the ways we love each other imperfectly and hope for each other stubbornly and build things together that outlast the difficulties of their making. Elemental is that kind of story, and it deserves to be seen and revisited and appreciated for a very long time. Filmmaking techniques and visual style. The technical achievement of Elemental is genuinely unprecedented, and understanding what Pixar actually did to create this film gives you a deeper appreciation for what you are seeing on screen. Fire and water are among the most complex phenomena in nature to simulate computationally. They are inherently irregular, constantly changing, governed by physics that makes them resist the kind of consistent character design that animation requires. You cannot simply design a fire character the way you design a human character. Fire does not hold still. It does not maintain proportions. It flickers and changes and responds to its environment in ways that are extraordinarily difficult to control and predict in a computational model. Pixar's technical team, working on Elemental, built entirely new simulation systems to address these challenges. For Ember, they developed what can be described as a fire simulation engine that allowed her body to be both genuinely fire, responding to physics in ways that look and feel real, and also expressively controlled, capable of conveying the subtle range of emotion that animation requires. The system allows Ember's flame to change color and intensity with her emotional state in ways that feel completely natural and completely readable. When she is angry, her fire shifts toward harsher oranges and deep reds. When she is tender or happy, it settles into warmer golds and soft yellows. When she is moved or emotionally open, there's a quality to the light she emits that is softer and more luminous than her default state. These changes are never stated explicitly in the dialogue. They are shown through the visual language of fire itself. For Wade, the challenge was different but equally complex. Water has to be transparent, reflective, and responsive to light in ways that are immediately familiar to any viewer, because we all see water every day, and our brains are very good at detecting when water does not look right. And yet Wade has to be a character. He has to have a face. He has to convey emotion. He has to be immediately readable as a person with an inner life rather than just a simulation of a physical phenomenon. The Pixar team achieved this through a combination of techniques that maintain the physical accuracy of water's optical properties, while also allowing Wade's form to be expressive and emotionally legible. The way light refracts through Wade is genuine optics. The way his forms subtly shift to convey surprise or sadness or joy is genuine character animation. Combining these two things in a way that feels seamless is an extraordinary technical achievement. Element City itself required an equally ambitious approach to its creation. The city is an original creation with no direct real-world equivalent, and yet it had to feel immediately real and lived in. The production design team drew on a wide range of visual references, from dense Asian cities and neighborhoods to American urban environments to more fantastical architectural traditions, and synthesized these into something that felt coherent and habitable. The neighborhoods are visually distinct from each other in ways that feel organic rather than designed, as if the different communities that make up Element City have left their mark on the built environment through decades of daily life. The Firetown neighborhood, in particular, reflects Peter Sohn's own memories of immigrant neighborhoods in New York City. The density of the buildings, the way they lean toward each other as if sharing warmth, the shop fronts with their cultural goods spilling out toward the street, the way the light falls differently here than in the more open parts of the city. All of this speaks to a visual experience that Sohn absorbed in his childhood and translated into the language of fire elementals and animated architecture. The result is a neighborhood that feels like it has a history, like it was built by real people over real time in response to real needs. That feeling of authentic place is rare in animation and enormously valuable to the film's emotional impact. The color science of the film is extraordinary. Pixar's team worked with color theory and with the specific optical properties of different types of light to create a visual world where the different elemental communities are distinguished not just by the obvious quality of their element, but by the specific quality of the light they emit and interact with. Firelight is warm and fluctuating and directional. Waterlight is cool and reflective and omnidirectional. Earthlight is steady and rich and absorptive. Airlight is diffuse and pale and almost invisible. When these different light sources exist in the same frame, the combinations produce visual effects that feel genuinely magical, like seeing something that exists outside the normal physical world, but that your visual system immediately processes as beautiful and right. Director Peter Sohn approaches the storytelling with a patience and confidence that is notable and that not all filmmakers working in animation possess. Animation, as a medium, has historically trended toward kinetic energy and relentless pacing, partly because of audience expectations and partly because of the commercial reality that animated films are often primarily marketed to children who are assumed to want constant visual stimulation. Sohn resists these tendencies. Elemental is willing to be quiet. It is willing to let a scene develop slowly, to allow silence to carry meaning, to trust the audience to feel something without being pushed toward it by music or action. The greenhouse sequence, the scene where Ember and Wade discover that their elements can create something new when they meet in just the right way, is the finest example of this directorial patience. The scene builds slowly. It is quiet and intimate. The visual effects are extraordinary, but they are deployed in service of a very small, very personal moment rather than as a spectacle in their own right. Sohn holds on the moment. He lets it breathe. He trusts that what is happening between these two characters, the wonder and the recognition, and the beginning of something that should be impossible, will be felt by the audience if he simply creates the conditions for it and then stays out of the way. Thomas Newman's score is one of the great unsung achievements of the film. Newman is a composer with a rare gift for music that supports without overwhelming, that creates emotional space without filling it entirely. His score for Elemental uses a chamber orchestra as its foundation, but incorporates unusual textures and timbres that reflect the film's elemental themes. There are moments in the score that sound like fire, warm and crackling and unpredictable. There are moments that sound like water, flowing and reflective and constantly changing. And there are moments in the music that belong to neither element, that exist in the space between them, that have the quality of steam or of something new being created from two things that were previously separate. The editing of the film by Steven Schaefer deserves particular attention because the editing in an animated film carries a different kind of responsibility than in a live-action film. In animation, every frame is deliberately created. There is no accidental beauty, no spontaneous moment caught by a camera that happened to be in the right place. Every visual choice is intentional, which means that the editing, the choice of what to show and for how long and in what order, is essentially a creative act of curation from an already completely controlled set of materials. Schaefer's editing in Elemental has a rhythm that feels organic and responsive to the story's emotional needs in a way that excellent editing always does, and that is very hard to achieve. The cuts come when they need to and not before. The film does not rush. It does not linger self-indulgently. It breathes. The voice performances are worth discussing in more detail than is usually given to animated films, because voice acting in animation is genuinely a separate and distinct craft from on-screen performance, and the work done in Elemental is exceptional across the board. Leah Lewis as Ember brings a rawness and authenticity to the role that is immediately apparent. Lewis does not approach Ember as a cartoon character. She approaches her as a real person with real feelings, and the result is a performance that has genuine emotional weight in ways that animated voice performances often do not. The scenes where Ember is most vulnerable, where she is fighting with her father, or admitting what she truly wants, or allowing herself to be seen by Wade, have a quality of genuine feeling that is rare and moving. Lewis clearly understood that Ember's story was not primarily about the fantastical elements of her world, but about the deeply personal and human experience of figuring out who you are when the people you love have already decided who you should be. Mamoudou Athie as Wade found a way to make the character's emotional openness feel entirely sincere rather than performative. There is a risk with a character like Wade that his warmth and his ready tears would come across as a quirk, a comic trait, rather than a genuine quality of personality. Athie avoids this completely. His Wade feels genuinely moved by things, genuinely delighted, genuinely caring, in a way that makes his emotional expressiveness not something to be gently mocked, but something to be valued and perhaps even aspired to. Ronnie Del Carmen as Bernie delivers what is arguably the most powerful voice performance in the film. Del Carmen is a Pixar veteran with deep roots in the studio storytelling culture, and he brings to Bernie a quality of live and authenticity that goes beyond technique. When Bernie speaks about what he has built and what he hoped for Ember and what he fears losing, you believe every word because Del Carmen is drawing from something real. The scene where Bernie finally opens up to Ember about what he truly wants for her is the emotional peak of the film, and Del Carmen's delivery of it is simply extraordinary. Critical response and audience reaction. The story of how Elemental was received by the world is complicated and interesting in ways that reveal something about how we assess animated films, how we measure success in cinema, and how critical consensus can evolve over time. The film premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in May 2023. Cannes is primarily a festival that celebrates art house and prestige cinema, and the reception of animated family films there is always somewhat uncertain. The initial critical response was mixed. Several reviewers acknowledged the film's extraordinary visual beauty and its emotional ambition, while expressing reservations about the familiarity of its story structure and the directness of its thematic concerns. The immigrant experience themes were praised as well-intentioned, but by some critics found to be handled with more earnestness than complexity. The romance was seen by some as charming, and by others as somewhat conventional. The consensus that formed in the immediate aftermath of the premiere was that Elemental was a good film, technically remarkable, emotionally sincere, but perhaps not among Pixar's very best. This initial assessment was reinforced rather than challenged by the film's opening weekend performance in the United States. Elemental opened in mid-June 2023 and recorded the lowest opening weekend for a Pixar theatrical release in the studio's history. The number was widely reported and generated significant industry conversation. Analysts offered various explanations. Some pointed to the decision to bring Pixar back to theaters after several streaming releases and argued that audiences had adjusted their expectations and habits during the pandemic era. Some suggested that the marketing for the film had not communicated its emotional core effectively. Some pointed to the summer competition from other films. Whatever the specific causes, the opening weekend was unambiguously disappointing from a commercial standpoint. But then the film did something that weak films rarely do. It held. Its weekly performance did not collapse the way films without audience support typically collapse after a weak opening. Word of mouth was strong and growing. People who saw the film were deeply affected by it, and they communicated that to the people in their lives. Immigrant families and first-generation individuals in particular began sharing their responses on social media, and these responses had a personal intensity and specificity that suggested the film had genuinely connected with lived experience in ways that went beyond normal audience appreciation. Over its full theatrical run, Elemental earned approximately $496 million worldwide. This is a significant recovery from the doom and gloom of the opening weekend, and represents a film that found a large and genuine audience over time. The recovery was specifically driven by strong international performance in markets where the immigrant experience themes resonated particularly deeply, including in Asian markets where the specific cultural references of the film's immigrant story were immediately and personally legible. The film's streaming performance on Disney+, after its theatrical window ended, was by all available indications very strong. The streaming environment proved to be an excellent home for a film with this particular emotional character, a film that rewards repeat viewing and that generates a kind of personal connection that leads people to watch it with family members, to share it with friends, to return to in moments when its particular emotional truth feels especially relevant. Many viewers who eventually became passionate advocates for the film encountered it first on streaming, and their enthusiasm has contributed to the slow but steady growth of its reputation over time. The critical consensus on Elemental has shifted somewhat from its initial mixed reception. Later critical assessments have tended to give more credit to the film's emotional depth and its cultural specificity. The immigrant experience themes have been recognized more broadly as genuinely powerful rather than merely well-intentioned. The romance has been praised for its patience and its earned quality. The technical achievements have been acknowledged as among the most significant in recent animation history. The criticisms that remain valid and that persist in the critical conversation around the film include the feeling that Element City as a world is insufficiently explored, that there are fascinating social and cultural dynamics suggested by the setting that the film does not develop fully. The third act has been noted by several critics as moving somewhat quickly, resolving the film's central tensions in ways that feel a little too tidy given the complexity of what has been raised. And the decision to center the story on a romance in a setting that could support much broader social commentary has been questioned by critics who wanted more from the world building. These are fair and substantive criticisms. Elemental is not a flawless film. It makes choices that are understandable but limiting. The decision to focus so tightly on Ember and Wade's relationship and on the Lumen family dynamics means that the broader world of Element City, which is rich enough for many films, remains somewhat in the background. The social inequality themes raised by the Firetown infrastructure neglect are not fully developed or resolved. The film gestures towards systemic critique without fully committing to it. Audience reception, as measured by review aggregator scores and by the quality and intensity of the conversation around the film, has consistently exceeded critical reception. Audiences tend to respond more directly to emotional truth and less to narrative convention than critics do. And Elemental's emotional truth is powerful enough to generate genuine and lasting response even from audiences who might acknowledge its structural imperfections. The ending of Elemental has generated significant discussion among viewers, not because it is ambiguous or confusing, but because it makes some choices that are more mature and less conventionally satisfying than audiences might expect from a Pixar film. After the flooding crisis is resolved, after Bernie's moment of profound opening to Ember, and after Ember's reconciliation with herself and her decision to pursue her art, the film moves into its final sequence with a clear emotional destination in mind. Ember has been offered an opportunity to study glassblowing formally. This is not a minor opportunity. It represents genuine recognition of her talent and a real path toward the life she's been quietly dreaming about. The question the film has been building toward is whether she will take it. She takes it, and this matters enormously. The film does not find a clever way to let Ember have everything she wants simultaneously, to run the shop and also become a professional artist, to stay in Firetown and also go out into the wider world. It asks her to make a genuine choice, and the choice she makes is herself. She chooses her own life, her own path, her own future. And because Bernie has given her his blessing, this choice does not break the family. It fulfills it. The conversation between Ember and Wade that precedes her departure is one of the most quietly brave scenes in the film. Ember tells Wade that she is going. She is not asking his permission, and she is not apologizing for her decision. She is telling him clearly and honestly what she is choosing, and she is also telling him clearly that she wants him in her life even as it changes. Wade's response is absolutely characteristic. He is proud of her. He is moved. He cries. And he tells her without any ambiguity that he is happy for her, and that whatever comes next, he chooses her too. The film does not give them a perfectly resolved future. It does not tell us exactly how a fire woman and a waterman are going to navigate the practicalities of a relationship when she is going somewhere he is not. It trusts the audience to understand that love, when it is real, finds ways to continue even when the practical circumstances are uncertain. What the ending gives us is not a solution, but a foundation. Two people who have found each other and chosen each other with full awareness of the challenges. That is enough. That is, in fact, more than most love stories provide. The question of whether a sequel is possible or likely is an interesting one. Pixar has not announced any follow-up project set in the world of Element City, and the film works so completely as a standalone story that a direct continuation would need to find its own reasons for existing rather than simply extending what has already been accomplished. However, the world of Element City is genuinely rich enough to support additional stories. There are generations of fire elemental history that have not been told. There are other neighborhoods and other communities and other dynamics in the city that have only been glimpsed. And there's the ongoing story of how fire elementals fit into the broader city, a story with real social depth that the film raises without fully resolving. If Pixar were to return to this world, the most interesting direction would not necessarily be a direct sequel to Ember and Wade's story. It might be something set earlier, exploring the generation of Bernie and Cinder and the building of Firetown, or something set later, in a world that Ember and Wade have helped to change in some small way. The world is rich enough for many stories. Whether those stories are ever told will depend on how Elemental's legacy develops over time and on decisions that Pixar has not yet made public. Conclusion: Elemental is a film that asks a lot of its audience. It asks you to invest emotionally in a story about immigrant families and first-generation children, and a complicated love between parents who sacrificed everything and children who carry that sacrifice with them every day. It asks you to care about a romance between a fire woman and a waterman who should not be able to exist in the same space. It asks you to sit with discomfort, with the particular discomfort of watching someone you care about make choices that are both understandable and limiting. And it asks you to believe that love, real love, can expand to include things it did not previously contain. These are large asks, and the film does not always fulfill them perfectly. The pacing in certain sections is uneven. The world is richer than the story fully explores. Some of the emotional resolutions come a little too neatly. These are real limitations, and they matter, but they matter less than what the film gets right. And what it gets right, it gets extraordinarily right. The relationship between Ember and Bernie is one of the most precisely observed and emotionally honest parent-child relationships in the entire history of animated film. Not the most dramatic, not the most operatic, but among the most true. The specific texture being a first-generation child who loves and honors and is shaped by your immigrant parents, while also reaching towards something that is entirely your own. The film captures this with specificity and a compassion that is genuinely rare. The visual world of Elemental is a staggering achievement. Pixar pushed itself to create something that had never been done before. Characters made of fire and water who feel completely real and completely expressive. A city that feels genuinely alive and inhabited. A color language that tells the emotional story of the film at every moment without a single word of dialogue. The technical accomplishment would be remarkable even if the story behind it were mediocre. The fact that it serves a story with genuine emotional depth makes it extraordinary. Peter Sohn made a film about his own life and his own family and his own deepest experiences. Translated into the language of a fantastical world where fire and water try to find ways to coexist. The personal investment is visible in every scene. This is not a film made by committee or by algorithm. It is a film made by a person who had something specific and true to say, and who found a way to say it with all the resources and talent available to him. That kind of personal filmmaking, even when imperfect, has a quality of aliveness that technically superior but emotionally hollow work never achieves. There is a specific audience for whom Elemental is not just a good film, but an important one. Children of immigrants, first-generation individuals who have navigated the space between their parents' world and the broader society they grew up in, people who have ever felt the weight of family expectation alongside the pull of their own truth. These are the people for whom Elemental holds a mirror with unusual accuracy and unusual kindness. To see your own experience, your own specific emotional landscape, reflected in a major Pixar production, is not a small thing. Representation of this kind, specific and personal and honest rather than generic and palatable, communicates something that matters enormously. It says that your story is worth telling, that the things your family went through are worth putting on the largest screens in the world, that the complexity of living between cultures and between expectations and between the person you were raised to be and the person you are becoming is not an obstacle to be minimized, but a profound human experience worth exploring with the full resources of cinematic art. For everyone else, Elemental offers an invitation to understand, through the specific experience of fire elementals in a fantastical city, something universal about what it costs to leave home and build something new, about what parents give up for their children, and what they sometimes ask for in return, about what love looks like when it is large enough to include freedom, about what it feels like to discover that something impossible is happening to you and to choose it anyway. The film ends with steam, with fire and water creating something new that neither could make alone, with an impossibility that is also somehow a beginning. And that is not a bad place to end a story about all the ways we reach across the distances between us and find each other anyway. Elemental is beautiful, honest, imperfect, and deeply human. It is worth your time. It is worth more than one viewing. And for many people, it will be worth carrying with them for a long time after the credits roll.